Have you ever looked at an observer and thought, what does it see with those beady eyes? Is it looking at me? What's going on behind that perfectly neutral yet piercingly judgmental expression? Well, I have, and today we're going to answer that question once and for all with a complete list of literally everything an observer can detect, as of 1.19.3. But before we start listing everything, what does an observer actually do? I can answer that. What was that? I said I can answer that. Oh, well then of course, Mr. Observer, by all means. Cheers. Since my creation in 2016, I've remained one of the most mysterious blocks in Minecraft, but my purpose is quite simple. I exist to stare intently at the block directly in front of me for all of eternity. I don't see past this one block. This block is the object of all of my focus. Nothing distracts me, nothing excites me, apart from one thing: change. As soon as I see something change in front of my face, I get really excited, but just for a moment, before I regain my composure. This brief moment of elation makes itself known from my behind, where a full signal strength of 15 is emitted for one redstone tick, which you may use as you please, you weirdo. So to answer the question of what I can see with my two beady eyes, the answer is everything. Nothing gets past me. I'm always watching. Oh, wait a second. That's not true. Yes, it is. No. Okay, thank you, Mr. Observer. I'll take it over from here. Okay, so where were we? Oh, right, the list. So we'll be going roughly in the order of the creative inventory, with a few deviations for organization's sake. You'll get it. But first, let's start with... Some blocks have multiple things that the observer can detect, but others don't have anything special that the observer can see. However, there are two things that the observer can detect from every block in the game that isn't an entity like an armor stand or an item frame. And those two things are placing the block and breaking the block, as you can see here. So with that out of the way, let's get into all of our special cases. When you strip it, this includes nether logs as well. Same goes for all barks. When you open it and when you close it. When it changes shape. When you double them up. When you change its shape, like if you put a block or a fence next to it. And this goes for walls as well. A special case that can happen with walls but not with fences is that it can change shape vertically as well. When it opens and when it closes. This goes for all wood doors and iron doors. When you open it and close it as well. This goes for all wood and iron. Similarly to the fences, it can detect when it changes its shape. When it oxidizes, deoxidizes, and when you wax it and when you unwax it. This goes for all forms of copper. When it gets wet and turns into solid concrete. This goes for all colors of concrete powder. Very similarly to the fence gate and the iron bars, it can detect when it changes shape, when you place more of them, when you light them, and when you put them out. As for the banner, it doesn't do anything special, but it is worth noting that when you place it against a wall, only the top block is seen by the observer, and when placed on the ground, only the bottom block is seen by the observer. Just something to point out. Alright folks, strap in because this is the big one. Welcome to Natural Blocks, aka Game Mechanic Purgatory. Please keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle at all times, and try not to scream. Let's get started. When the grass dies, when the grass spreads, when you make a path by smacking it with a shovel, when you destroy the path by putting a block on top of it, when you till the soil, when the soil gets wet, when the soil dries out, when you stomp on the soil because you're a monster, when it turns into podzol because you planted a big spruce nearby, when it turns into rooted dirt, and when it turns into mud. For the grass, it can also detect when a sheep eats it, and when snow gets on top of it, and when it's removed. When it dies, when it spreads, when you make a path by smacking it with a shovel, when it turns into rooted dirt, and when it gets frosty and unfrosty, just like the grass block. When you make a path by smacking it with a shovel, when it turns into rooted dirt, and when it gets frosty and unfrosty, just like the mycelium and the grass block. When you make a path by smacking it with a shovel, when you hoe it to turn it into regular dirt, and when it turns into rooted dirt. When you make a path by, you guessed it, right-clicking it with a shovel, and when you hoe it to turn it into regular dirt. When it dries out into clay. When it melts, and when it freezes. When it gets thicker, and when it melts. When it grows. When it dies, and when it spreads. Note that nylium doesn't spread naturally, you need to click on a netherrack with bone meal. When it gets stimulated, and there are many ways to do so. You can place blocks by it, you can drop an entity on it, you can walk on it, etc. Just play around with it, it gets excited easily. When it grows. When you change its texture by placing other stems next to it. When it decays, and when its distance to the nearest log changes. Check out the way the leaves update as I put down these logs, but I'd recommend experimenting with this on your own if you're interested. Just like the mushroom stem, when it changes texture when you place another mushroom block next to it. Just like the other mushroom blocks, when it changes texture when you place another mushroom block next to it. When it advances its stage, and when it finally grows. It can also detect failed attempts at growing. When it ages up. When it grows. When it grows. When it grows. I'll give you one guess. Yeah, when it grows. When it changes from a shoot to a bamboo, and then it changes into a thicker bamboo by aging up, it changes the leaf amount on it, and when it grows. This all happens in a very interesting sequence. Check out the order of updates that are happening here. When it ages up, and when it grows. Technically, cactus also ages up, but you can't actually observe it with an observer since you can't put one next to a cactus. You also cannot put one on top of a cactus because for some reason that actually prevents it from aging at all. When the tip changes its texture due to growing, and when it grows. Same as the weeping vines, when it changes texture, and when it grows. When it grows. Also when it sags and returns back to normal, either by leaving it alone or by powering it with redstone. Boing. When it grows. When it grows, and when it matures. When it grows. This can happen multiple times in the same block though, due to the way that it can spread to different sides within the same block. When you place more of them, when they crack, when they hatch, and when you trample on them like an absolute monster. When they grow, and when they grow fruit, and when you harvest that fruit. When it grows, and when it grows fruit, when it grows even more fruit, and then when you harvest it. Disclaimer, it cannot see your pain. When it grows. When it grows. When it grows, or when you place more of them. When it grows. When it dries up and dies. When it dries up and dies. When it dries up and dies. Dang, sorry coral. When it absorbs water. When you give it a face. When the honey level increases, when you harvest the honey, and when you harvest the honeycomb. Same thing goes with the artificial beehives. When it grows, kind of like the glow lichen, except instead of triggered by bone meal, it's triggered by death. When it gets excited by something nearby dying. It's messed up. When it, shrieks, and also when it stops shrieking. When it senses something, and when it deactivates. Whew, and that's a wrap on natural blocks. Go ahead, give yourself a pat on the back, take a quick breather, maybe get some water, but we're not done yet, because up next, we've got functional blocks. When it activates, and when it deactivates. Same goes for the smoker and the blast furnace. When you light it, and when you put it out. However, it does not detect when you put food on it or when it pops off. Curious. When it gets damaged. When the level increases, when the texture changes at the top, and when it empties. When you insert a disc and when you remove the disc. When you add bottles and when you remove bottles. However, it can't see when you add blaze powder or when it's brewing. When the water level rises, when the water level falls, when the snow level rises, and when you take out the powdered snow. This also goes for filling and removing lava. When it's activated and deactivated, but only with redstone, it for some reason doesn't detect when you hit it with your hand or when you hit it with a projectile. When its texture changes, and when it changes its style of support, such as being supported from the bottom or being supported from the side, this propagates throughout the entire structure that's being changed. When it lights up by getting struck by lightning, and when it returns to normal. When you stick a plant inside it, and when you take it out. When you place a book, when you flip a page, and when you remove the book. When it opens, and when it closes. Curiously, it activates twice per open and close. Chests, trap chests, and ender chests don't do anything. When it opens, and when it closes. Each time you load it, and when it depletes. When you place an ender eye inside it. When you change it from a dot to a cross, and vice versa. When it changes shape due to connections. When it turns on, when it turns off, and when the signal strength changes. When it turns off, and when it turns on. When you change the delay, when it turns on, when it turns off, when it's locked, and when it's unlocked. When you change it to subtract mode, when you change it to compare mode, when it turns on, and when it turns off. However, it does not detect signal strength change. When it activates, and when it deactivates. When it activates, and, you guessed it, when it deactivates. When it's pressed, and when it's released. This goes for all wood and all stone buttons. When it's pressed, and when it's released. This goes for all wood, stone, and weighted pressure plates. As mentioned before, when it's pressed, when it's released, and when it changes its signal strength by having more or less items on top of it. This goes for both iron and gold weighted pressure plates. When it's connected, when it's disconnected, when it's activated, and when it deactivates. Special note is that when you disconnect it, it actually triggers first, so it generates 2 updates. String is a strange one. It sends updates when it changes shape, when it connects between tripwire hooks, when it disconnects between tripwire hooks, when an entity enters its hitbox, and when an entity exits its hitbox. When you change it to day mode, when you change it to night mode, and when it changes signal strength as the day progresses. When it extends, and when it retracts. Obviously this goes for the sticky variant as well. When it activates, and when it deactivates. When it activates, and when it deactivates. When it locks, and when it unlocks. When it triggers. The observer also fires when moved, but this is because it detects a new block in front of it. This is very commonly used in monostable circuits. When you change its note, when it activates, when it deactivates, and when its instrument changes by changing the block underneath it. When it changes shape, either by cornering, straightening, going up, or going down. When it changes direction, when it changes to going up or down, when it activates, and when it deactivates. When it changes direction, when it changes to going up or down, when it activates, and when it deactivates. Very similar to the powered rail. Just like the powered rail, when it changes direction, when it changes to going up or down, when it activates, and when it deactivates. When it ignites, but that's because it turns into an entity. When it turns on, and when it turns off. This section is for blocks that are best covered as a broad category than one at a time. The first of which is all blocks that can be turned into moss will be detected by an observer when it does turn into moss. This includes dirt, deep slate, all the stone variants, and a bunch of other blocks that I'm not going to bother to mention right now. For a full list, give the wiki a visit. All blocks that can become infested will be detected by an observer when a silverfish enters into it. These include cobblestone, stone bricks, cracked stone bricks, mossy stone bricks, and a few others. Once again, check out the wiki if you want a full list. All gravity blocks will trigger an observer when it starts falling and when it stops falling. It will not trigger an observer mid-fall. Crops with multiple stages such as wheat, carrots, potatoes, beetroot, melon, and pumpkins will trigger an observer at every stage of growth. The special case for melon and pumpkin stems is that when they're fully grown, their stems will bend to the side, which the observer can detect as well. All waterloggable blocks will trigger an update when they're waterlogged and when they're unwaterlogged. All generated blocks, such as stone, cobblestone, obsidian, and basalt, will trigger an observer when formed. When it goes from flowing to source block, and at any change in water level. As you can see, while the water disappears, it's basically sending constant updates to the observer. It can also detect when water sources get bubbly and unbubbly, whether they're doing it the normal way or the BFG way. This goes for the entire column of water at the same time. Any change in the lava level, though this doesn't happen as frequently or as granularly as water. Finally, for cake. When you place a candle on top of it, when you light the candle, when you extinguish the candle, and when you eat a slice of cake. See, Mr. Observer? You can't see everything. What was that? I was focused on what's in front of me. There's nothing in front of you. So? Okay, so anyways, thank you for tuning into this extremely information-dense video. This video was so much work and a ton of research, so if you could drop a like and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. I did my very best with the research, but I must admit, there might be some things that I missed, and if I did, please let me know in the comments. And if you made it this far, go ahead and leave a little observer face in the comments. I think that'd be fun. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'm always watching.